Hopefully this guide will help you in preparing for the upcoming test on Friday. It is on chapters 1 and 10, and I'll point out some things here. You are responsible for all the reading that you've done and everything that I've gone over in class. Remember, with chapter 10 we covered a lot to do with Congress. We started by looking at who the members are. We talked about their constituencies. Remember that the House, the district, is its constituency, and all the people within that district. The Senate and the senators each have an entire state as their constituency. Remember this idea of constituent services, the role that members play. Also remember, as we were talking about constituencies, we really spent some time defining what those constituencies were. The reapportionment, how do states get the number of representatives that they get? Again, reapportionment does not apply to the Senate, only to the House. Redistricting only applies to the House. Gerrymandering only applies to the House. And remember also that partisan gerrymandering is allowed. If Democrats want to create districts that will ensure that Democrats get reelected, they can do so. You cannot gerrymander based on a discriminatory factor. You can't discriminate against somebody because of their race, religion, whatever. That would be violating the one-man, one-vote rule. Remember how the Supreme Court and some of those court cases that we looked at really focused in on that. We then started to look at the incumbent advantage, and we talked about the election, how do members get elected. Remember those advantages. Remember what those advantages are, but then also consider if incumbents are always being reelected, does that influence or affect popular sovereignty? Link these things back to the core values as best you can. Then we started looking at organization. Know some of the organization, but also know the powers of the leadership. Remember that committee chairs are here, subcommittee chairs, the speaker, the majority leader, the majority whip. They all have certain roles and responsibilities and power. And a lot of that has to do with majority rule. Again, another core value. When we look at what Congress does, again, we look at lawmaking, oversight, and budget making, which is a specific example of lawmaking. Also, don't forget constituent services. Oversight. Remember, I didn't have a chance to go over it, but think about Congress passes all these laws. It passes specific things in the appropriation bills. It appropriates specific monies for specific purposes as outlined in the authorization bill. And if the bureaucracy chooses to ignore that stuff, think about the impact that has and the importance of oversight. A lot of the stuff is just ordinary stuff, day-to-day stuff. It doesn't have to be, a terrorist attack or something like that. Oversight is just making sure that money is being properly spent, programs are being properly executed. As we switch back to the table of contents for Chapter 1, remember, we talked about this idea of who we are as Americans, the demographic profile, the melting pot versus the salad bowl, and all of the discussions that we had on that, okay? Immigration experience and all of those things. But then we really focused in on these ideas of political culture and core values, and that's going to be important for you to make those linkages to Congress, to the bicameral Congress and things like that. Think about the brief introduction I gave you to the Constitution, those aspects of our core values which end up being reflected in how government is established and how it functions. When you consider all the materials that I've given you, be sure to go to Google Classroom. Don't forget about the About tab. I've dumped a lot of information in there. You should make your way through it. You should use your notes to kind of supplement that because you've used your notes to capture things that I have emphasized in class. You have a couple of assignment sheets. There are some PowerPoints. There are supplemental documents. There are links to various things. Go back and look at what these links are. It will jog your memory about the things that we did. I've dumped a little bit of stuff about the Constitution in there. Again, some of those powers and 2 years versus 6 years, stuff like that. Again, you've got some vocabulary lists for Chapter 1 as well. And very important at this point, be sure you're following the news. It will help you. It will help you understand what is being said and how people are talking about these very complex ideas. Watch CNN, watch a news broadcast, watch Fox, but get a sense for how people use all those terms that you're learning in ordinary everyday language. One of the most important things when you are doing your free response questions, it's really going to be focusing on detail. Most of the time, it's not going to be, tell me everything you know about the lawmaking process, but you're going to need to be able to identify specific points in the process, and in so doing, explain how it's a check and a balance, explain how the Senate and the House are different, explain how requiring the House to start all revenue bills is a representation of popular sovereignty. So really kind of making sure that you're able to look at the details of the process, not just knowing the process. You have to know the process, but being able to explain one or two specific parts of that process are going to be really important. The other thing to do is to make sure that you're supporting statements that you make. If you make a statement that has to do with, I don't know, you say that the Senate is good, you have to back it up. You have to provide detail. Use the word because, and I've provided an example here that kind of speaks to that. Notice how I make a statement, but then I support it with 2 or 3 extra sentences. Always make sure that you're doing that. Make a statement, provide a couple of sentences in support. Don't just start making statement. At that point, all you're doing is listing information, and you're not really explaining it, demonstrating your knowledge of it, or analyzing it. That's going to be a really key part of your success for any of these exams. The multiple choice, they'll be interesting. You just have to see them and get used to them. The final thing is just remember that you are responsible for everything that you've read, even if I haven't covered it in class. See me with questions. Take the time to review all of this stuff. Be sure that you are reviewing this stuff every day. Come to me with questions. If I don't answer your question, make sure that I do. Come back to me. Bring it up in class. Stop me. Interrupt me. Do it at the beginning of class is easier than doing it at the end because I tend to lose track of time. But go ahead and make sure that you make sure that I clarify any questions that you have. Know your key terms, but I'm not going to ask you to define them. I'm going to ask you to use them in your explanation of a particular aspect of the process. I may ask you about how the Speaker of the House, controlling the majority party, controlling the Rules Committee, has a significant impact on the legislative process. And you need to explain that to me. So you need to know and understand these terms beyond the simple definition of that. All right, well, that's about as much as I want to do. It's longer than I wanted. Come see me if you have questions. Hopefully this is helpful.